Ultra Reddit presents. What is one of the dumbest things you've done when your brain was on autopilot? I was folding my freshly laundered bed linens while simultaneously putzing around the house. I don't know what to tell you, but somehow, I was folding a pillowcase, then the next moment, I couldn't find it anywhere, and I looked everywhere in my very tiny home. It wasn't in the folded pile, it wasn't in the closet, it wasn't in the bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen where I puttered around while folding said laundry. It still haunts me, and I'm going to find that effing pillowcase even if it kills me. Edit. I didn't expect this to blow up. I am now even more determined to look for that pillowcase. Lost it last Wednesday. I am at my mother's house for the weekend, but will update this when I get back home. It's definitely not in my hand, my other hand, trash or fridge. My main suspects are the closet or within the fitted sheets, meaning I have to refold them. Frown. What's funnier is there are two pillowcases of the same design, and it's making me even crazier thinking I imagine the other one. I was also searching for it holding the other one like it was a missing cat poster. Lol. Also, I am not German, just learning the language. I used to have a cat, but now I currently don't. When I was like 9 or 10, my grandparents had a beach house in Biloxi, Mississippi. I know, why the hell there? Anyway, the condominium complex had a pool, and my mother took me to the pool as the adults were going off gambling and whatnot. Mom and I arrive at the pool, and there's a girl there, maybe 13 or 14? Me, being on the edge of full-blown adolescence, was locked on her, so Mom was talking about God knows what at the time. I'm just haha. Yeah Mom, while watching this girl swim and loading her into my 10-year-old spank bank. I begin to take off my shirt, but I had gone full autopilot and slid my swim trunks down as if I was about to get into a shower. Oh fuck. I pulled them back up because I think the girl had noticed, but Mom didn't. I told my mother I had to take a wicked shit and went back to the condo, and now I have this horrid memory to look back on every now and again, even into my late 20s. Forgot my infant daughter was in the car seat and decided to go grocery shopping. For those of you who see articles of this happening and think that only drug addicts or idiots do this, and that they deserve prison sentences, fuck off. Shit like this happens because your brain is often on autopilot. So if you insert something into the mix, your brain will sometimes fast forward over that detail and keep on chugging along to the inevitable conclusion. In my case, my daughter was asleep in the back seat and I focused on getting to point B along the way. I saw our local grocery store and remembered that we needed avocados to make guacamole over the weekend. I then started to try to remember what other stuff we might need since I was already at the market. I parked the car and go in. Ended up buying onions and avocados. It's a tiny market and I was the only one at the checkout, so this took all of 5 minutes, maybe even less. I get back to the car and see my kids strapped in, still blissfully asleep. Oh fuck me. I wish more people would share these stories so more people would believe them. My wife primarily took our children to daycare. And I'll never forget taking an important phone call one morning on the way to drop my son off. I finished the call while parked and sitting in the front seat. When I hung up, I'll never forget my 3-year-old asking from the back seat, "Daddy, why are we at your office?" It can happen so easily. And a sleeping kid plus a broken routine plus a little extra stress can easily make this a worse situation than I had. People need to be aware of that, instead of judgmental, because their denial actually increases the likelihood that it will happen to them. In 90% of the death cases at least, it's just a heartbreaking tragedy. Be me, 16 years old, going on my first date. I have a 1978 F-150, which is notable only because it has these little triangle windows that can pivot next to the main window, and it sat on large, 35 inches, tires, making looking in the cab from the ground a bit difficult. Anyway, I'm on my way to meet my love, stop for gas, go inside to pay, come back out and realize I've locked my fucking keys in the truck. I panic, but I know that it is pretty easy to jimmy the triangular window open and unlock the door with some sturdy, thinnish object. I shove my hands in my pockets and, luck, I feel some metal in my pocket. I yank it out and set to picking my window open. It doesn't take too long before victory and I throw open the door, only to see my keys are not in the ignition. Here's the thing I still cannot wrap my head around to this day. I picked the window open with my fucking key. Now, I like to think I'm at least of average intellect, so I choose to attribute this complete lack of brain to the power of 16-year-old lust. In the Air Force, after arriving at your first duty station, you take a week where you were taught about the base and community in a classroom environment. It's not great, but what's especially annoying is that every single person who comes to talk, private businesses, other airmen, leadership, religious groups, private groups, fucking everyone, ends their spiel with, "Don't drink and drive," usually with a story, or a video, or anecdote, or something attached. Don't get me wrong, it's an important message, but we were hearing it 5 to 8 times per day, minimum, For a weekend it was really wearing thin. The week is done and I'm at my location and I'm talking with my chief about the class and he asked what I thought. I told him that the drinking and driving thing was too much. It was so overdone that it started to lose meaning to me by the end, and that every time someone told a sob story about it I just didn't care. He had a solemn voice and said something along the lines of, "Well, maybe it would be of interest to you to know that my wife and child were killed by a drunk driver," and with zero thought I responded, "And I don't care." We just stared at each other for a few seconds before my brain realized what I'd said, and I realized he had turned very bright red. He motioned for me to leave and I did so promptly. I go into autopilot a lot at work. I change oil and do basic maintenance on cars, just to make the day go by faster, because let's face it, my job sucks. But one day I pulled in a Toyota Tundra, big ass pavement princess, fully sponsored by Daddy's Dollar. Lifted it up, drained the oil, rotated the tires, checked the filters, checked the battery, filled it up, and went up front for the recommendations. I told the service writer, let's call him Bob, my recommendations. Bob says that's great, but did you find the nail in the tire? What? No. I didn't know there was one. Bob asks, did you read the paperwork? Well shit, no oil change, no rotate, just a tire repair. I had to pay $79 for an oil change and filter on this big ass truck, 9 quarts of oil, because my dumbass went into complete autopilot. On the bright side, dude was ecstatic to learn he got a free service. Well, I don't know if this qualifies as an autopilot story, but friend of a friend, we call her Glitter Gulch now, getting ready for her appointment at the gynecologist. Shower shaven for good measure, she sprays some of her daughter's feminine hygiene product down there. At the gynecologist, legs in the stirrups, and doc starts to examine her and says, "My, aren't we fancy today?" She's like, "WTF? Is this doctor a perv?" A little bit uncomfortable and maybe a little freaked out. She just wanted to get this done and get home. And she gets home, goes to the bathroom and wipes, and there's glitter all over her. She mistakenly sprayed hair glitter all over her vagina and went to the gynecologist like that. Needless to say, she never went back. I still cringe when I think about this. When I was a student at the place I now work in, hooray for adult apprenticeships, I was effectively working 2 jobs, 6 days a week across 60 hours, so my brain was frazzled. I arrived at my apprenticeship job in the morning, put my stuff in my locker, threw my keys in and locked the padlock as I always do. However, a few days prior to that, I lost my locker key from my lanyard, and after finding it again, put it on my other keys for safekeeping. My brain was on autopilot that morning, and I realized around an hour later that I had locked my locker key in my locker. I couldn't get into my locker. Everything was in there, including my travel card and purse, so I had to borrow money from a colleague to get home that evening. I did have a spare key but couldn't find it when I got home, and had to borrow a pair of bolt cutters from my dad to get the lock off. When I was 6 I started training judo. I stopped 5 years later, but this situation is when I'm 7 or 8. Me and my cousin 2 years younger than me, were playing in the playground in a restaurant while my mom and aunt eat pizza. We were playing chase, hide and seek, etc. When we stopped chasing each other, we decided to play hide and seek. He was the hider and I was looking for him. Then he was behind me and ran and jumped on my back, and I just threw him above my head and he fell on the ground. He didn't cry because he wasn't the type of person, and we laughed. My dad was in town. Me and my girlfriend were going to meet him for lunch. We decided last minute that we were going bail on the plans because we were going to look at an apartment to rent. We actually were going to look at the apartment, but ended up staying home and having sex. Well, we saw him later in the day, and he asks what the apartment like? And my girlfriend begins to say, "What? We didn't go to the apartment." And my lying brain on autopilot response quickly grabbed her face and kissed her in front of my dad, which I'd never done and will never do again. To stop her from talking, turns out I forgot to include her in the lie. I forgot to tell her that we went to the apartment and it was nice but not what we were looking for, the elaborate scenario I made up in my head. He kind of awkwardly walked away, and after a while I had to go try to explain what just happened. Sometimes white lies, even without real consequence, can catch up to you. He probably didn't like that I lied, but most of all just thought I was weird for grabbing my girlfriend and kissing her out of nowhere. For a few months I worked in Chicago while my home was in Indianapolis. I had a 4-day work week, so I would drive to Chicago Sunday night and then back home on Thursday evening. I would always fill my gas tank coming home after I left the Chicago area. One Sunday night, on the way to Chicago, I stopped for gas at my usual station, the one that I normally stopped at on Thursday night. Then I got back on the highway and continued my trip. It took me about 45 minutes to realize I was heading back to Indy instead of Chicago. I saw the exit for Lafayette and was confused because I had already passed it over an hour ago. My brother ordered nachos at a Mexican restaurant, grabbed a chip and proceeded to watch himself dip it into his tea. After about 2 dips, he came back into reality, shook his head and went, "What? My mother is an EMT." After a 24-hour shift she came home and tried to unlock the front door with her car keys button and did that for about 5 minutes. I once drove to work when I was supposed to drop my younger brother off at school. Neither of us seemed to notice until we got to my workplace and I had turned around. He was late,